big audience, a bit nervy. Ash asked me to come and have a little chat to you all, and I said, oh, I haven't really got a story, and I'm not working for any company at the moment. He said, no, just talk about some of the stuff that you've done. So I was having a think about it, and I had a conversation with a couple of girlfriends one night. We were drinking Chardonnay, solving the world's problems as a bunch of HR nerds do. And the comment came up about trinks and trinkets, do they build culture? And it always has stuck with me. And I thought, it doesn't matter how many parties you put on, how much bling you give people, how good the coffee machine is. If you turn up on Monday morning and your boss is a tool, you're not engaged. Simple, right? So what I want to talk about is what have I done in the past to try and help our bosses be the best they can be, our leaders to be the best. So as I said, I've worked for McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Red Rooster. I used to sell chips, then I was making chips. I've also been privileged enough to work across multiple countries. So what I want to do now is just share with you some of my learnings of what I've done and achieved. And there's really three things. One of it's about consistent execution, and you heard Ange talk about consistency. By the way, it was Ange who actually said trinks and trinkets don't build culture. So it's the importance of execution. It's about building upon the learning. I think sometimes with HR people, we get really obsessed with implementation. And sometimes I think that can be because it's hard sometimes to recognise what's our impact. And so it's easy to say, well, I implemented this and I implemented this and I implemented that. But you actually get results from execution. So staying focused, and really some of the learnings I've had about working across the multiple countries. So to give you a bit of background, consistent execution. When I was in Pizza Hut, KFC and Taco Bell a couple of times, one of the things that they are exceptional about is consistent execution of their programs. To be a shift supervisor, you do leading a shift. To be an assistant manager, you learn to be a learning to run a restaurant. To be an area manager, there's a program, and it's a very consistent program, and it builds upon each other. And so by the time you become a restaurant manager, you've learned a whole lot of stuff around the technical skills, but also the people skills. So then when I came to McCain, completely inconsistent execution. You got leadership training if your boss thought it was important. There was no systemic approaches, there was no structured processes, and we outsourced everything. So if you wanted to get leadership training, you would go, oh, we'll get you an external coach. So you didn't have the same tools were being used, and it was really completely and utterly random. So I went to my boss and I put together a business case, and I got the financials, because when your boss is an ex-accountant, it's all about the financials. And I said, okay, this is the amount of money that we're spending on all of these external coaches, but yet we can't see any impact. Can we put together an internal program? And he said, okay, you can do it. You can do 12 months. Put together a program. So we came up with a program called MLEAP. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, is our MLEAP program and how we designed it. So working in a matrix global organisation, there's lots of positives, but there can also be disadvantages. So one of the things we needed to do was make sure that we were aligned with global practices. Now, at that time in McCain, luckily there weren't many global practices, so we had pretty much free range, which was great. But there were a couple of programs. There was a plant manager university that used a couple of practices, GROW, SBIQ, situational leadership. Now, those programs have been around for a while, but when they're executed well, they're impactful. They're great. So we said, well, we'll utilise those. And then we said we needed to also teach people leadership, but we also needed to teach management. And I know the word management gets a bad rap, but if you actually think about it, everybody manages a system, particularly for middle management. You're managing the processes. So you need to manage the processes, but you need to lead the people. So we needed to make sure we had both of those incorporated in the program. And then we needed to think about what tools are we going to use? And so that's when we decided we needed the LSI tool. And I'd worked with LSI for multiple years and saw the impact it had on people. So I said, right, let's use LSI. And then we said, if we're going to make this supportive, it's got to be beyond just the MLEAP program. So we also then wanted to get all of our leadership teams, senior leadership teams in each of the countries, to also participate in the LSI, which then said, how are we going to support that? Well, we need to get our people accredited. So we had so many benefits of this because we also then went out and accredited 26 HR practitioners across India, China, South Africa and Australia, so that we had people on the ground for ongoing support. This is an hourglass in case people don't know what that is. But that was about time. We wanted the program to go over a period of time. So I don't know about you guys, but I've never seen anybody walk away from a 3-day leadership course transformed. Maybe for a day or so, but it's like going to Anthony Robbins. If anyone's ever been to Anthony Robbins and you all come out, you go, oh, I'm going to change my life, and it never lasts. That's my experience anyway. So we needed it to go over a period of time, and we also needed it to be, because we had people from 13 different countries attending this course, it needed to be done both in person and then ongoing virtually. So it had to be both. Luckily, COVID really improved the quality of Teams and Zoom, so it made it a lot easier. And so where we ended up with was a program, that's a delivery driver because I'm all about loyalty, even to old brands. So we came up with a program that's 9 months, 24 to 26 participants. Now, when we first started the program, it wasn't for hypos. We said we've actually got a bunch of people out there that have grown up through the business, a bit like Ingham's, grown up through the business. We need to actually upskill them, who, particularly in our manufacturing plants, are leading large numbers of people. So there's certain roles that became mandatory, and one of those is a production manager, because big impact on a big number of people. Now it's more like hypos are coming through the program, but as I said at the beginning, it was really gather up all your existing people, because what's the experience they're having? If you only focus on your hypos to start with these programs, what's happening to the rest of the organisation? And you never know, you might have some hypos out there once they've gone through a program. Face-to-face, LSI, as I said about, and then LSI, as I talked about, integrated beyond the MLEAP, so that we're starting to develop a language throughout the organisation. And this is where the discipline comes in place, because we said, okay, the structure we said is we're going to have monthly modules. We broke them into small groups. The dates were agreed at the beginning of the program. Each month we then taught them a skill, and whether it be a management skill, how to run an effective meeting, or how to build trust, a leadership skill, or how to give feedback. And we taught the theory, you'd go away, you'd practice it, you'd have to come back the next month and tell your peers, how did you go with that particular skill? Peer exposure, never underestimate it, because it's only that first time that somebody turns up and they didn't do the homework and everybody else did the homework, pretty much did the homework the next time round. And the commitment. So these monthly meetings were never cancelled and rarely changed. And if you couldn't attend one session, we would hunt you down and make you attend the next session. Because it's about, you've made a commitment, we've made a commitment to you, you need to give us a commitment back. So where did we land? So 5 years the program's been running successfully. We've had 120 leaders that have gone through the process, and it's integrated into our HR practices now. So when we do our annual talent reviews and what have you, this is where we decide who's going on the program. It's got a real brand. There's a waiting list now, which is great. And we also do an 18-month retest for everybody that does, whether they're from MLEAP or they've done LSI because they're in a senior role. Every 18 months, the retest is done. And that's integrated into the HR practices. So we actually have one of our HR business partners, that's their KPI. So it doesn't get forgotten. It's not sitting on the side of a desk. It's that I'm no longer with McCain, but the program's still running because it's integrated. So in summary of that, it's really about the execution. You can have your strategy, but unless you execute, you don't have success. So that was fantastic. And then we'd built credibility. So for 5 years, we'd built credibility and we were developing these leaders. And then the business came to us and said, what more can you do for us? Because we see a gap. We need leaders to increase their business acumen. We want them to get to the next level, or you've got people hiring in for the first time that are sitting on an ELT or SLT. You know, how do we help them? And so this is when we said, okay, let's come up with the next level, and this was really for our hypos, whose next role would be sitting on a senior leadership team. And we wanted to continue the their leadership journey, because I think all of us agree the journey never ends. But we also wanted to improve their business acumen, get them to move from being a functional leader to a business leader. And Ange talked about that, and Kieran talked about that. You know, when they joined ARN, everybody was very much in their own silo. So how do you, as you sit as an SLT, actually think about the broader business? And we also saw that there was a real need for these senior roles to improve their peer relationships. We often, I think as we become more senior, those peer relationships, I think, become much, much more important. So we were given the green light, not the red light, the green light, or the blue light in a human synergistics point of view, and we decided to get a bit creative, and this is where we had a really lot of fun. So we had 12 participants, and we actually went to this place in Dalesford, and it's absolutely awesome. It's an old hotel, and we all just went in there and we lived there for a week. Cooked, cleaned, did all of that from, I think we had 5 or 6 different countries. So you want to get to know people, slightly, could have gone both ways. Ash from Humans, he was very nervous, weren't you, Ash? You were like super nervous. He goes, but what if we get, if we're picking them right, that shouldn't happen. So fantastic social experiment. So what tool did we use? We used the Management Impact tool, which is an amazing tool. And it was and again, it was building upon, so we weren't introducing new language, it was building upon the work we'd done with the LSI. We also then used real case studies that we'd worked with our Great Britain business about inflationary pressures and crop issues and what have you. And the team had to then work as small groups, cross-functional, cross-countries, to solve these problems. And we spent a lot of time working on the development plan. And this was where the integration really of getting the MI feedback and then actually working on these case studies was really, we really got to be quite granular on the development plan. So I think a lot of us see these development plans, you would have all seen them, that, you know, have got massive motherhood statements, you know, I'm going to be a better delegator. How? I don't know. So we were able to get really granular, but watching them as the facilitators, particularly when some of them were getting feedback from their MI that they either didn't want to accept or couldn't really understand it, we were able to sort of draw back to how the behaviour that we were seeing in the case studies and say, do you think that that could be playing out in real life? So it gave really tangible way to get down to a very, very granular development plan. That's, again, it's a 6-month duration. We're actually revisiting those development plans every month, and people are actually talking and driving that accountability. How are you going at changing those behaviours? So within the McCain business, we actually, as I said, building upon tools. At frontline leadership, we're using MEPS, middle management, LSI, and senior management, management impact. And it's creating a culture, it's creating a conversation, it's creating the same language. We're not running off and doing different things. So then I just want to, my last little thing I want to talk about is just this cross-cultural leadership. So as I said, I was fortunate enough to work through all those 14 countries. And it's interesting how often people will use either their function or possibly their country they're from to excuse behaviour. I'm in sales, therefore I have to be competitive. I'm sure you've all heard that. Or I'm from Australia, therefore it's okay for me to be oppositional. So you often get those, you know, hiding behind it. And so one of the things we did was, which I'll get to in a second, we got them to map the ideal. But the other thing we did was we needed to have really good translations. 70% of the participants in all our programs, English is their second language. So we needed to get really good translations. My advice, don't use Google. Invest on the money and get it done properly. Your participants will thank you for it. But one of the things that we did was the circumplex exercise. Before we did any of our programs, we asked them to draw the ideal. And invariably it will come out like this. And this really gives you a talking point when you get, in my country I have to be, or in my function I have to be. you can then point back to the circumplex that they drew and say, well, you just told me that's not the case. So that really addressed that, that ownership to say, well, you told me the ideal was like that, so you don't have to be like that. It's a really simple exercise. And then I guess the other thing is all of these other tools that we did, they're universal leadership principles. You don't need to change things because you're working in different countries or what have you, because leadership is leadership. So my key takeaways, consistent execution. If you've got a program, execute, execute, execute. Build upon it, tweak it, but don't, it's not about evolution, it's, you know what I mean. Build upon it. And don't get distracted. Don't get distracted. Build upon your programs. And Ange talked to more of the same, more of the same. And universal leadership, leadership's leadership. So that's it. And Ange, Penny, Trinks and Trinkets do not build culture. So thank you very much.